Welcome, everyone, to the final results presentation for the 8th year of the Los Angeles Raptor study. I'm Jerry Hans with Friends of Griffith Park. It was yet another amazing nesting season for our urban raptors. It was also a rewarding year for finding and monitoring their nests and making sense out of a huge amount of data collected by all of our volunteers. A big thank you from Friends of Griffith Park to all the dedicated volunteers. We did our best to assign our new volunteers at least one active nest and offered field help whenever needed. Many of our seasoned returning volunteers have become experts on reading the birds and identifying their territories, and also finding new nests. It's our volunteers who are driving a more thorough coverage of nesting territories within our study area. Word's out to the public as well due to outreach efforts and word on the street. This year, we received tips left and right from the general public, so thanks to all the tipsters out there too. Please consider signing on as a volunteer for next year's study so we can keep up the momentum. The LA Raptor study is recognized locally as a model for community science work, which has a targeted scientific purpose backed by lots of data collected by trained volunteers. Our team leaders, Dan and Nuri, along with our volunteers and Friends of Griffith Park, are to be credited for the study's success. And we'll celebrate this on Sunday at the volunteer dinner. Now let me introduce our Raptor study leads. Nuri Katz is UCLA's first Chief Sustainability Officer. She's devoted a lot to environmental education, animal rescue, and is also a photographer. She also serves as a member of the Los Angeles Board of Water and Power Commission. Nuri attended Humboldt State University and then went to UCLA for an MBA and Master's in Public Policy. She's also pursuing her PhD at UCLA. And as some of you know, she was recently honored by the Ojai Raptor Center for her rescue work. And again, thanks for all of your rescue work and congratulations on that well-deserved praise, Nuri. Dan Cooper attended Harvard and UC Riverside and received his PhD at UCLA during the pandemic. Dan is Senior Conservation Biologist for RCD, the Resource Conservation District of Santa Monica Mountains. Dan is Friends of Griffith Park's Scientific Director and has overseen various surveys and scientific studies in Griffith Park, providing a solid basis for our nonprofit's advocacy work. Highlights of park science he's led in Griffith Park includes the Griffith Park Connectivity Study, which was responsible for the first confirmation of P22 in 2012. Dan also directed the park's Rare Plant Survey, which was one of my favorites. He's not just a bird person, he's truly an expert on Griffith Park's fauna and flora. We want lots of questions tonight after the presentation. Questions should go into the Q&A box down on the bottom of your screen. Putting in along the way is fine if you'd like, and we'll turn to those at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to start things off here now by handing this off to Dan. Again, thanks and welcome for coming tonight.
Thank you. And we'll, before Dan kicks it off, we'll get the screen share going here. And I want to say thank you. I think I forgot to unmute when I was thanking you, Jerry, for the congratulations, and also some volunteers who've put the comments in the chat. We have the chat set to just host some panelists. So if you have concerns or questions, you can share those with us there. But if you can figure out how to access the Q&A, that's the best place to put the questions. And with that, I'll give it to Dan and we'll begin the screen share.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Dan Cooper, and as Jerry said, this is the 8th year of the LA Raptor study. And I just want to thank Jerry for his leadership and vision with this study, and particularly this week when he flew home from hiking in Europe to be here tonight. So thanks again, Jerry. All right, go ahead. So just to outline the purpose of the study, we have a lot of volunteers on the call, but then we have some people who aren't. So we're doing this study to really look at hawks and owls as indicator species, so environmental indicators. We want to develop a baseline data set of nesting raptors, figure out how many there are, where they're located. And this information will really help us minimize human-wildlife conflict around the city while still encouraging recreation and everything else we do in our wild and open areas and around our homes. We'd like to use this information to inform management, and I'll be talking about that later on, how we've done that. And then finally, contribute to regional species assessments. At local conferences, we've met other raptor folks around the country, and there are some similar studies to what we're doing in other cities around the US. So for those not familiar with our study area, it's changed a bit over the years. So it started in Griffith Park, which is that gray area in the center. And in the years since we started in 2017, we've expanded as our volunteer pool has expanded in every direction. So now we go out to the Sepulveda Basin in the northwest, we go down to the Baldwin Hills in the southwest, out to Exposition Park, into East LA, and then up, kind of following the Arroyo Seco into southwest Pasadena and the edge of Glendale. So I'll be going through some of the raptors we've studied over the years and just some brief natural history notes about them. And then we'll get into some data. So this is just a review to you volunteers mostly, but our largest one is the red-tailed hawk. It's a really common bird. I was just telling Jerry and Narit as we were waiting that I found a pair at Cal State Long Beach today, seem to be sitting on a nest. So they're pretty much everywhere. They're soaring a lot, and they tend to live in big open natural habitats as opposed to our more urban raptors. So this is your backyard raptor in LA. The Cooper's hawk is the bird that's going to be sitting on your back wall or making some sounds from your backyard or front yard tree. It's often called peregrine falcon by locals, but peregrine falcon is a different species that we'll show you a little later on. This is an accipiter, so it's not related to the red-tailed hawk that closely, which is a buteo. It's long and slender with a long tail, and it's very personable and noisy. Even noisier is the red-shouldered hawk. This bird is a lot less common than either the red tail or the Coopers that I just showed you. We're always super excited when we find a nest of this thing or a new territory of red-shouldered hawks, and they make this loud seagull call. Great horned owl is one of the night birds of LA. It's a species that we don't really know too much. We didn't really know too much about its ecology and where it lived in LA when we started the study. But as we bumped along with our research, we've really learned a tremendous amount about what great horned owls like, where they live, where they nest. We'll be discussing that later as well. This diminutive little guy is American kestrel. American kestrel used to be the most common, probably the most common raptor in LA. You know, it would be found in all the agricultural fields that once covered the LA basin. Today, it's about the rarest. So we've only found a handful, single-digit territories of American kestrel in our entire study area. They're around in winter, so driving along the 10 freeway, you might see one sitting on a light pole. But in the breeding season, they move outside of our area now, and we just rarely find them. But we have turned them up, particularly in East LA. So as we've expanded our study east, we're running into a few more kestrels. The bigger falcon we have is the peregrine falcon. The peregrine is found on building ledges, really high up. It operates in a completely different airspace and dimension than the other raptors that I've shown you. It usually flies really high, darts after pigeons, and then returns to a high ledge. So it's not a bird you're going to run into that much driving around LA, and you certainly won't see it in your backyard unless you live in like a tower in West Hollywood or Century City downtown. This year, we decided to put some extra emphasis on finding owls, other owls other than great horned owl. And barn owl was one of our targets. So barn owl, we've now learned, does occur kind of sparsely in the study area, particularly along the Biona Creek area through the west side. It's locally found in Glendale, sort of some Culver City, some kind of random low elevation locations, but also a couple sites in and around Griffith Park as well, which was a surprise. Probably our rarest bird or most enigmatic bird period is Western screech owl. This is a bird that maybe 50 years ago would have been a lot more familiar to Angelinos, particularly in the hills. You'd see them in sycamore cavities like this or in oak tree cavities. Um, Today, we haven't confirmed any nesting during the 8 years of the study. We believe they're out there. We think that there are, seems like two population centers, one in Laurel Canyon and the other in Mount Washington. And aside from those two locations, they're almost completely, seemingly completely absent. But next year, we hope to really redouble our efforts tracking down Western screech owls and trying to crack the code of where these things are found. All right. So, looking across LA, you might think, how could you possibly find a raptor nesting in this place? But we do. So, our nests tend to come from sort of a few different types of locations, and the mixture of raptors in each one tends to be a little different. So, we have these green, hilly neighborhoods, and these are the ones that are kind of in the hills leading up to Mulholland Drive in the Santa Monica Mountains, parts of the Baldwin Hills. These are areas that feature a lot of open space. So that walnut woodland and grassy areas on the slopes is where they forage, but then they nest in these big non-native trees like that pine or eucalyptus on the left, and also tall pine trees. But then we have plenty of raptors nesting in what may seem like unusual habitat for some people. These are these sparse suburban areas. So this is Craner Ave in North Hollywood. And there are plenty of Cooper's hawks patrolling these neighborhoods all spring and summer long. And then even more extreme, I'm sure a lot of you recognize this view, right through Koreatown and Mid-City. We actually have a red-tailed hawk nesting within this view that we suspected was there because we found the old nest early on and finally this year confirmed it as active. It was on a building ledge on the left, and it brought its 4 juveniles out to those pine trees on the far left side of the screen, where we found it kind of late spring, the young kind of clamoring around the pine trees. So pretty incredible. So that's a red-tailed hawk living right in the middle of the city. Another one of our super urban red-tailed hawk pairs is this one nesting on the MacArthur building. I think some of you in the audience who are really into design maybe recognize that or now recognize what it is, but it's one of the kind of gargoyle type figures on the side of the building that provides just enough structure to support the red tail nest. And as you can see, the red tail's been bringing in eucalyptus and palm fronds and everything else to raise its young. And of course, there's the obligate poolside Cooper's hawk view. And this is just a common sight of Cooper's hawks doing what they do in the urban environment. These are 3 juveniles lined up. Tell by the pale eyes. We don't publicize the locations of nests. However, we do share the data with the Rec and Parks Department and a few other partners who are interested in managing these hawks in their territories. We've also done quite a bit of kind of targeted outreach of people who have raptor nests in their yards or neighborhoods, and Nurit could talk later a little bit about how we do that. So we find nests in all sorts of ways. So one of the great ways is community science. So as iNaturalist, eBird, as they've increased in popularity, you can actually go every day to these websites and see more raptor observations. And so in the last 8 years, iNaturalist has exploded in popularity. And so we found a number of territories just by looking in mid-spring and say, oh, wow, we don't have a red-shouldered hawk in that neighborhood. And then we drive over and hopefully we find it. But then more often than not, we really use the bird's behavior to show us where their nests are. So this was a particularly tricky nest. The nest structure is completely hidden by pine needles. It's on the lower right, just above the photo credit. This bird was incubating when I found it. And all you could see was kind of a white blotch of the center of the breast, just looking right through those pine needles. But it was in an area where I'd seen a pair. It's up on Mulholland. And on that stretch of Mulholland, I had just seen a pair just about every time I drove by it. So I knew it was around there somewhere. Just took a while. Sometimes it's a lot more obvious. So here's the parking area at some condos near Village Green, down Ladera Heights area, underneath the red-tailed nest. We'll take what we call finger photos of these nests. Oftentimes, we'll describe the nest, but the volunteers will go out and say, well, I can't find it. And, this happens to us too. Even a big structure like a red-tailed hawk nest, you'd think it'd be easy to see, but sometimes you drive up and you see 20 or 30 different giant eucalyptus. It's kind of hard to find where the bird is. So this helps our volunteers find the nests. All right, so let's get into some data. So in 2024, we rechecked or discovered anew over 650 raptor territories in that study area. So not all of these are active. These include places that were active in prior years that are no longer so. Sometimes it's just a pair without a nest we think has a nest. So, but still pretty good for the area. We found, so our most common bird this year was Cooper's hawk. So it surpassed red-tailed hawk as the most common raptor. And a couple of years ago, we had only 222 in 2023. We were looking at 215 red-tailed hawks. That was up. 57 red shoulders was a little bit up, but we think we've really topped out on red-shouldered hawk. We're always amazed when we find another territory because they're pretty scarce and pretty obvious. Great horned owls really jumped this year. We put a lot of effort in kind of cracking the code on that, basically checking old raven nests and old other raptor nests. So great horns don't build their own nest. They just take over other raptor nests. And once we sort of caught on to that, then we were like, well, we didn't see hawks in this territory, but we're going to check it anyway. And sometimes there was a great horned sitting on that old hawk nest. So we expect that number to rise quite a bit. And they're all over the city too, not just in the hills. 7 kestrel territories. I mentioned one just spectacular territory in Boyle Heights in this little residential park that's just, you could throw a rock across this park. It's so small. And it has a kestrel nesting in it, in a palm tree, just completely bizarre. We got some great tips on peregrines, which Narit will discuss. We found some barn owl territories, at least one with the help of some UCLA students, which we'll talk about. And then we went through eBird and INAT, and we just collected all of the Western screech owl reports from the study area, regardless of whether they were a territory or a pair. And we came up with only about 11 screech owl individuals. So here's how they're doing through time. So in 2020, we really increased our activity in looking for nests. And so a lot of the data will be 2020 on. So as you can see, we're just finding and monitoring more red-tailed hawks in the study area. We don't necessarily think that there are more red-tailed hawks each year, but we're certainly finding them. But maybe there are more each year. There are more we're finding more fledglings too, and this is what it shows. They don't seem to be declining. Cooper's hawk has dipped a little bit from the high, which was in 2021, which was kind of interesting. We're not 100% sure why we had the highest number of Cooper's territories active in 2021, and we're not sure whether we're going to hit that again, but it's kind of a mixed bag with these things, but they're still super common. Red shoulders continue to climb in kind of a predictable way, which is interesting. Number of active territories bumps up a little, number of fledglings bumps up a little. So again, the metrics are kind of going in the right direction for these things. And then we can look at some of this data graphically. The average line of the rate of territories fledged is that dashed line. And so some species have been a little bit above the line, like Cooper's hawk fledged a few more territories than would be expected by the average of all the raptors. And red-shouldered hawk seems to be a little bit below the line lately. But for some reason this year, everything kind of converged, and pretty much all of our species were in that 75 to 80% fledge rate. Again, who knows why? We're looking at this idea of reoccupancy, particularly as it relates to disturbance. And I should mention, we'll be posting our written report on the Friends of Griffith Park website shortly. That report really gets into the disturbance factor and like why some of these nests were not active year to year. But this shows that things bounce around a little bit of reoccupation, but red-tailed hawks are consistently highly, they have high site fidelity, so they return to the nest at a higher rate, certainly than the Cooper's hawk and maybe than the red shoulder, although we have many fewer red shoulder hawk nests each year. Okay, now this is looking at the percentage of territories fledged again from the prior year. So if they were successful in the past year, are they successful this year? And again, red tail is kind of the clear winner. It's just consistently higher than the others. I'm not sure what happened with red shoulders. In 2020, we had 100% fledging again from the prior year. I don't know that we found all the ones in the territory. So that does skew the data a little bit when it's incomplete like that. So I would just pay attention to the last couple years, and it's just showing that red tails are just really good at fledging from the prior year. Very predictable. Okay, mean number of chicks per year. This is looking at how many young are produced in each nest. And again, the average line is the dashed line. So if you're above that dashed line, that species produces a little more than average. If you're below, that's a little fewer. So you can see that Cooper's hawk tend to produce a lot of young. We've had some 4, 5, and I think rarely in some studies, even 6 young nests. And then red shoulder is the opposite extreme. So red shoulder has many fewer young than our other raptors, which could explain why it is not the most common raptor. It just has a very different strategy than Cooper's. All right. Okay, now something that was kind of interesting that we had the idea of when we are getting these big swings in precipitation, and that is that there might be a relationship between drought and rainfall. And so what we did is we looked at the prior year's rainfall, and we wanted to see if, well, maybe having a lot of chicks is an indication that the environment is very suitable for breeding. And so it could be that during dry years, we see fewer chicks. And we looked at this sort of counterintuitively. We looked at the percentage of nests with 1 chick. So it's a little bit reversed in your head, but you can see that it kind of it's kind of inversely related to rainfall at 2017, 2018, 2019. Things converge a little bit, but it still seems to be off, and it may be that there's like a deviation in average. So in other words, if it's too dry, there's a lot of single chick nests. And if it's too wet, that also increases the number of single chick nests. Like in 2023, it was super wet, and those numbers of single chick nests went up a little bit. So I don't know if this is real or not. I think it's sort of intriguing. We only looked at red-tailed hawks because they're really dependent on the prey species that are kind of live and die with drought and rainfall, the rodents and the rabbits. Whereas Cooper's hawks eat a lot of rats in the city, and birds, and are not eating rabbits out in the wild area where their lives are dependent on rainfall and grass growth and things like that. Right. All right, and at this point, I am going to pass it over to Narit to talk about threats to urban raptors.
Thank you, Dan. So the life of our urban raptors can be quite challenging. Dan was just talking about the impact of drought, and yeah, it was during some particularly dry years that we noticed that there seemed to be more single chick nests in those years, and we started exploring that. We found a paper related to goshawk that had taken that prior year rainfall approach, and so we kind of followed their lead on that. So it's something we're just starting to explore, and we may dig into more. But our raptors also face habitat degradation and loss. So this is particularly true in the case of kestrel. Although interestingly, there are some people that have posited that kestrel may have been impacted by the rise of Cooper's hawk, which, as Dan mentioned, do prey on birds, which can include smaller falcons. So we have some challenges there, loss of fields and open space. A lot of our raptors, I'll be talking a little bit about the rescue side, and a lot of our injured raptors, it's from building collisions and car collisions. But another major factor is the use of rodenticides, and Jerry actually has some news to share on that front, so I'm going to hand it to him for just a moment on the rodenticide front.
Thanks, Narit. Boy, it'd be great if we could put that list of 7 in order someday. I couldn't even guess which is most important. But generally, there's some very good news about the use of anticoagulant rodenticides, at least in California. The most potent, the second generation products have been banned in California since January of 2021. However, I should also say that from our personal experience, second gens were still showing up in toxicology even 2 years after being regulated. In at least one dead raptor that we found and tested, a red-shouldered hawk, as well as a couple mammals we tested 1.5 to 2 years after the ban. And in fact, I mentioned this in an article in our last printed newsletter, which was a story about a red-shouldered pair that we've been covering in our study, where the male was found dead. And I think there could be maybe a lot of stockpiled material that the pest control companies seem to want to use up before they stop putting it in their bait boxes. I'm not really sure. But still, we're making some progress on this issue. There's good news on the first generation agents for sure. Difazanone was banned beginning of January 2024. And I refer to it as the common denominator in most of the birds and mammals that Friends of Griffith Park has tested over the last 10 years. And difazanone was the anticoagulant that made P22 very sick in 2014. Although difazanone is banned, it's now been replaced with chlorofazanone in bait boxes that we see everywhere. It's a slightly different arrangement of molecule. So now additional legislation has already moved through the California Assembly and the Senate to ban it, and it's sitting on Governor Newsom's desk to sign right now as we speak. So all of this is really good news. Many nonprofits, Poison Free, Malibu, Claw, Rats Are the Solution, and Center for Biological Diversity, along with friends, have all worked on this issue over quite a few years. Of course, there are exceptions to these bans for agricultural use and food storage, but eventually I feel that residential use and certainly use in wildlands of these anticoagulants will, for the most part, be eliminated.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Really appreciate the update. And during the Q&A, I'll put a link in the chat to the latest issue of the Griffith Park Reporter. It's a fantastic publication that Friends of Griffith Park puts out. And the same issue actually had 2 other great articles that are related here. One, Dan mentioned a team of UCLA students who assisted us this year through the IOES Senior Practicum. They did a project related to the distribution of breeding habitat for owls that was really insightful and will definitely impact the study in years to come. So there's a great article about the team in that issue. And there's also an article about tree trimming, which is my next topic. So be sure to read it. And of course, if you're not already a member of Friends of Griffith Park, you can join and receive your very own copy as well. So construction disturbance and tree trimming continues to be a challenge for our raptors. It doesn't generally result in fatality or mortality, but it can definitely disrupt the nesting season. And we've had some pretty heartbreaking examples of that over the years. This was one from a year or two ago. It was a long-standing territory in Mount Washington where the neighbors had gotten to know this pair of red-tailed hawks that had been nesting there at least 10 years. And they called me distressed after tree trimmers had done this butcher job on the opposite side, and the nest had been removed. We reported this to CDFW, and I'll share some resources during the Q&A of what you can do if you see illegal trimming. It is definitely illegal to remove a raptor nest. In this case, the tree trimmers claimed they were not trying to remove the nest and accidentally hit a nest-carrying branch, but there's just no reason to butcher a tree to that level. So it continues to be a big issue in LA. This year, the heartbreaking one was again a red tail nest. This is a pine in the Sherman Oaks area that was just discovered this year. The nest was just discovered by Dan, and I checked on it and then went back just a couple weeks later. So this was definitely during nesting season still, and the birds had fledged, but the nest was still active. And again, it's illegal to remove even after the birds have left because raptors reuse their nests every year. And we discovered this, what I believe to be excessive tree trimming pictured on the right with the nests gone. So now we're back to square one with finding where this pair will end up. And with red tails, we have found sometimes they seem to leave the territory permanently when their nest is lost to tree trimming. We had a pair up in the Laurel Canyon area that disappeared. This Mount Washington pair never seemed to return to the same neighborhood. So that doesn't mean they're not establishing elsewhere, but it's definitely a significant disruption. With Cooper's hawks, they tend to change their nest sites a decent amount. They'll build a new nest sometimes each year. We don't know 100% why that is. It may be to protect from predators. Being smaller hawks and more vulnerable, they tend to build their nests much more hidden than red tails. So it could be to dissuade predators. We've even seen them have multiple nests in the same tree that seem to act like a decoy. They've certainly fooled us with a nest that wasn't the active nest. So they don't seem to be as heavily impacted in tree trimming in that they will rebuild even in the same season sometimes, but that doesn't mean it's not taking a lot of resources that they could otherwise put towards breeding. So with that in mind, we've collaborated with the International Society of Arboriculture and West Coast Arborists, who host a tree care for birds resource, which we'll also share in the chat later. And we have spoken at a workshop that they offer for tree managers and arborists in Los Angeles. You know, if only everyone were required to take it, I think we'd see a lot less of this negative tree trimming impacts. So we're looking into whether there are any policy levers or mechanisms that can help shift these issues around nesting birds and trees in Los Angeles. But in the meantime, sharing this website that I'll put in the chat with your own arborists or tree trimmers that you're working with and with friends and colleagues can go a long way to helping best practices be utilized. We were happy to see one example of a best practice where in Culver City, we went to check on a Cooper's hawk. I found the nest and then went around to the other side of the tree and found this sign, which showed that the nest had been discovered by arborists in the area, and tree maintenance by the city of Culver City was delayed in recognition that there was an active nest in the tree. So that's what we'd like to see more of. And this year we actually created signs for our volunteers to place on trees that were accessible. Some of our nests are way up on hillsides and not accessible, but plenty are backyard, front yard nests. So we shared signs, and we also shared for the first time this year letters to residents who owned the trees that the raptors were nesting in. And so volunteers could place those letters in resident mailboxes if they felt comfortable. And it worked. We had some residents call us with questions or to report issues, and sometimes to report mortalities. We had a difficult mortality of a great horned owl this year that fell into the motor of a gate, which was very sad. But we wouldn't have known about that if the resident hadn't gotten the letter and known who to call. So, you know, there's a lot of harm that humans can do to raptors, but there's also a lot that we can do to help. And I saw through the participants list of this webinar that the director of the Ojai Raptor Center has joined us tonight. So we're so glad to have you here, Kim. And following is going to be a couple rescue stories from this year. In recent years, we've partnered with LA Animal Services SMART Team, which is a specialized mobile animal rescue team. And this year they helped us do a number of renests, meaning when birds have fallen out of the nests or fledged too early and are not in a safe place and need to go back in the nest. So these are photos of a young red-tailed hawk that was renested into an 80-foot tree in the Sepulveda Basin. The photo on the right here from Officer Navarro is the other two siblings of this hawk greeting him as he was placing it back in the nest. This one was coordinated with California Wildlife Center, another wonderful wildlife rehab in Southern California. And this is their video of the rescue that we want to share with you. And I just realized I didn't select share sound, so I'm going to reshare really quickly here so that you can hear the video as well. All right.
A friend of California Wildlife Center alerted us to a red-tailed hawk nestling that had fallen from their nest in Balboa Park. We contacted Los Angeles Animal Services Small Animal Rescue Team to help coordinate the bird's renesting. We kept the young bird overnight to ensure that they did not fall prey to nearby predators or humans and to keep them warm and well fed. The next morning, the SMART team used a cherry picker to raise their officer up to the tree. He climbed the remaining feet as the nest was more than 80 feet from the base of the pine. Officer Navarro was greeted by the two other siblings. We are so grateful to the partnership of people like the LA SMART team who are also dedicated to the well-being of native California animals.
As I mentioned, we're joined tonight by members of the Ojai Raptor Center. They are truly the best specialists around in raptor rehabilitation and do incredible work. They repair all sorts of fractures and issues that we find in our urban raptors due to, as I mentioned, building collisions, vehicle collisions. I had one Cooper's hawk that was brought to me that had been shot, unfortunately. You'd hope that wouldn't happen in 2024, but it does. And they're able to take these birds and care for them. They even do what's called imping, which is adding feathers where feathers have been lost. Just absolutely amazing work. And so this year, a couple of these rescues also led to new discoveries for the study. One of these was a juvenile peregrine that had fledged from the nest, but was found on a busy street in Hollywood and taken to Ojai Raptor Center. ORC reached out to me about taking the juvenile back when it was recovered and reuniting it with its family, and asked if we knew where the nest was, and it turned out that we did not. We, as Dan mentioned, we hear about peregrines in very tall building areas of Los Angeles, like downtown, and also, you know, Beverly Hills, certain areas that have these tall buildings, but we did not know where they were nesting. So I spoke to the Lowe's Hotel, which was near the corner where this raptor had been found, and got permission to go up on the roof and try to see if they were nesting up there. We went up and we did the release on the helicopter pad. This is Jackie from Ojai Raptor Center and the juvenile peregrine who, after exiting the box, flew off. And interestingly, flew straight to their nest site, which was not on Lowe's, but actually on a tower across the way. They picked a tower that had an eagle or raptor gargoyle on it, which I thought was pretty interesting. But what was fascinating was from this height, we were able to see the whitewash high up on the tower, which would not have been visible from the street, and discover where the nest site was. So, you know, we depend on clues like that often to be able to see where nests are. Sometimes, as Dan showed with that car with the whitewash, it's what's under the nest that gives us the clue. And in this case, all the whitewash was falling not onto the street, but onto this ledge of the tower. So it was a really, you know, fortunate, serendipitous discovery that happened as part of this release. We had another one that was a juvenile peregrine taken to California Wildlife Center. And we also helped to coordinate bringing this one back to the nest. It was a similar situation, both happening the same year, but this one was in Mid-City. And we had heard about peregrines in this area, and in digging and doing some Googling to find the contact info, I found an article from the 1980s about peregrines nesting on a building on Wilshire. There's an old LA Times article. So I looked up the management for that building, and when I called them, it was just, again, a very fortunate moment where the management for the building that was in the 1980s article was also the management for a building where the peregrines had in fact been nesting for many years. And they had even a nest box on the ledge that was placed back when peregrines were in trouble. Peregrines were impacted a lot by DDT and have been recovering. So we were able to bring him back to the nest box. This is right after release onto the ledge. This was a photo from the building management of the young peregrines when they were just chicks, to give you a perspective. And then this was the view from their nest site in Mid-City. But he was able to fly soon after that and meet up with his parents and also siblings. This is the rescue up on a rooftop across the street from the nest, dining on what is probably a pigeon and having dinner with his siblings. So, you know, reunited, and it feels so good. Some really wonderful rescue stories this year. So what can you do to support raptors and wildlife in your yard? As Jerry mentioned, make sure not to use any rodenticides or poisons. That's a big one, and please educate your neighbors about that. Avoid trimming, removing trees or construction during nesting season, which is kind of February through August. If you absolutely must conduct work during nesting season, hire a biologist to do a nesting bird survey. More broadly, for supporting your local ecology, avoid those pesky loud leaf blowers and allow some leaf litter. That supports insects, which then support songbirds, which then support our predators, raptors, especially our Cooper's hawks, who dine mainly on birds. Planting native plants in your yard can also help support your local ecology. And as I mentioned, educating your neighbors. I know we have a lot of volunteers on the call tonight who are very familiar with how to observe raptors, but for those who are just getting started, nothing like a good pair of binoculars. Our very own study director, Dan Cooper, has done a review of some beginner binoculars in the New York Times, which you can check out. Just Google, or I'll put a link in the chat to the best binoculars for birds, nature, and the outdoors. And that really helps you observe the raptors from a safe distance that doesn't disturb them as well. Especially during nesting season, we really encourage our volunteers to keep as much of a distance as they can. So the more zoom, the better. And in the case of nesting raptors, we actually encourage you know, minimizing the time of observation to just what's needed to get the data. And sometimes even with more sensitive birds, hiding behind trees or observing from inside cars to really try not to disturb them. We don't want to flush our birds from the nest or cause disturbance. Citizen science, as Dan and Jerry both shared earlier, or community science, as we call it here in Los Angeles, is an incredible tool, and scientists really do use the data. So encourage you to check out different apps that are out there, including eBird and iNaturalist. With iNat, if you upload photos of animals and plants that you see, There are professional scientists who are part of the app who will actually help to ID your observations, and it's just an amazing tool. There are also some specialized Raptor ID resources for those who are excited about raptors. There's some great field guides out there, including by the Jerry Liguri, an amazing expert who unfortunately recently passed away. He has a book called Hawks from Every Angle that really helps you ID hawks when it's just, you're just seeing them way up against the sky. And there's actually a special Raptor ID app from Hawkwatch International that can help you figure out what you're looking at. You can help our study by helping us spread the word in terms of outreach. So we have an image we can send you that you can post on Nextdoor. Our volunteers help by posting this. And we have now a tips website. So I'll put those in the chat as well. We've really found a lot of nests through this type of outreach, places that we didn't know about. So the new tip line is tinyurl.com/LA Raptor tips, I believe. I'll double check and I'll share that. But for those who may watch this later on YouTube, you can also find that on our website, which is here on the screen, friendsofgriffithpark.org/Raptor study, and you can get a link to the tips there. And of course, if you haven't already, sign up to be a Raptor study volunteer. All of this work is made possible by our incredible volunteers. If you volunteered this year, join us again next year. And the application's open and ongoing at friendsofgriffithpark.org/Raptor study. So you're welcome to apply now, and you'll hear from us later this year as we're kicking off the 2025 season. Again, a huge thank you to Friends of Griffith Park for supporting and funding the LA Raptor study and being such an amazing partner in this work. And with that, we will open it up for questions with one of my favorite juvenile Cooper's hawk photos, courtesy of Jenn Rose. So please put your questions in the chat, or sorry, in the question and answer if you can find it, or the chat, and we look forward to answering. Thank you. All right, and I think we do have some questions here already. Okay. What is the total number of red-shouldered hawk nests recorded in the study? I think that was on one of the slides and it was 50 something, right?
Yeah,
Dan?
it was 57. So Harnawaz, that is all the I think we had 57 active. I have a copy of the report and I can look that up for you. It was up only 2 from last year, which was 55.
And the actual active ones, I think, were even less than that, right? The ones that were active this year.
I'm gonna have to look that up.
Yeah, I think that was more in the 30s.
Yeah, we checked 57.
Yep. And then the active, I think, from the graph looked like it was in the 30s. The next question someone put in the chat is the purpose of the study. You may have entered that before or after if you joined late, but I'll just reshare this slide that Dan went over, which is kind of why do we study raptors? They're definitely important keystone species, important predators, and this slide shares a little bit about that purpose. Okay, the next
Henry,
question.
I've got a follow-up to Harnawaz's question now.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, on red-shouldered.
Yeah, it's in our report. So we have a nice graph of the number of territories. But we say that in 2024, we saw 27 red-shouldered hawk nests fledge from 36 active territories. So 36, so we had 57 known, 36 were active. In other words, there was a pair around, and then of the 36, only 27 fledged. So it's a pretty uncommon hawk.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
We have a couple comments about flyers, actually asking for a similar flyer that our volunteers use, but one about rodenticides. And I think, Jerry, were we talking about or thinking about developing something like that through Friends of Griffith Park? I know there's already some great resources on that RATS website, which I'll find now and put in the chat.
Yeah, we've had some materials from time to time. I'm not sure if they're on our website right now. We could probably print some out again.
Yeah, I think there's some good materials. So here's some free outreach materials on rodenticide I'm going to put in the chat for everyone that are here to everyone from this website, Raptors Are the Solution. So that has some good stuff, but we can also work on developing additional flyers. And someone also asked about a flyer to distribute to neighbors with helpful tips like leaf blowers and tree trimming. Actually, the LA City Biodiversity Program has a kind of biodiversity guidelines document that was recently created that has a lot of that great information, which you could share with colleagues. So here is a link to that document. Okay. Were bioacoustic devices used for monitoring raptor nest sites? I'm interested in the use of these devices for studying sound ecology. What are your thoughts? And would we do some acoustic studying, Dan?
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I think we're probably a little bit at the edge of our bandwidth for what we're going to do. Just trying to keep up with 650 raptor territories is tough enough, but we are thinking of doing some setting up some webcams on a couple nests, and that reminds me, Nurit, to tell you, someone from the Natural History Museum wants to follow up with one of our nest cam ideas down there in Exposition Park. So not
Great,
really
yeah, we're looking forward to that. And we also have the building management of that peregrine nest is interested in hosting a webcam. So stay tuned for next season. We should have if all goes well, a couple live nest cams for you.
Yeah, but I think by setting up recording devices, it's a good non-invasive thing to do. So definitely contact us if you're a researcher or a student and want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are those bioacoustic, big satellite dish things. If people wanted to just come and do some recording, we'd be happy to coordinate on that if you know someone studying soundscapes. We got a raptor tip in the Q&A, which I'll leave there. Michael asks, do current volunteers need to re-sign up for next year? If you have changed where you live and the area you're interested in volunteering, then please fill out the form again. But actually for this year, I think I'm going to create a much simpler form for returning volunteers that doesn't have as many questions, just to notify us that you want to continue. So stay tuned for that for our current volunteers. All right, let's see, more questions. Is the reoccupancy of nests potentially a cycle? For example, ravens occupied our local great horned owl nest this season. Could the owls potentially reoccupy their former nest? I'm going to take that one. And the answer is definitely yes, it can be. So we had the first example of this in the study was a red-tailed hawk nest in the Sepulveda Basin that was taken over by great horned owls. And then the following year, it was taken back by the red-tailed pair. And then it is owls again now for the past 2 years. Our study's only been going on for 8 years, but I had a resident that I spoke to this year. We really learn a lot by talking to the residents of these homes that host our raptors. And this resident in Glendale reported that he's been living there for 30-something years. And for at least 20 of those, maybe the entire time, he's had rotating red-tailed hawk and great horned owl in this huge pine nest that he has. So every couple of years, they seem to switch off. So that is definitely something that seems to occur. All right. Typically, how long do juveniles from last season stay close to the territory of their parent raptors? Do you want to start on that one? And I might chime in some too.
Yeah, we're trying to learn about that. I think we're learning more about that each year. We had thought that once you leave the nest, you're gone, and you set up a territory right next door or wherever. We haven't marked any of these birds with bands or tags or anything, so we don't really know for sure. But in fact, other research, including that by Pete Bloom in Orange County, has found that juvenile birds can disperse even hundreds of miles and then come back. And so those are red tails. And the short answer is we don't really know a lot about it, but we do see a number of family groups in the spring that include the young from last year. Certainly with red tails. What do you think, Nurit, with Coopers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we do find that juveniles do seem to come back and visit their home territory. With Coopers, that may just be scoping out where they're going to settle in. But with red tails in the literature, I have found examples of juveniles coming back and looking for a handout, basically, like college students coming home wanting to do their laundry or, eat meals with their parents. The year following hatching, they do seem to sometimes come back. With Harris hawks, there's actually examples of like cooperation where the juveniles will come and help feed the siblings and actually almost co-parent.
We haven't seen that.
We haven't seen that with red tails, but we have seen the juvies kind of hang out. Red-tailed hawk do not breed in their first year after hatching. So those juveniles are kind of, we call them wandering juves. They're kind of just hanging out. With Cooper's hawk, almost 100% of female Cooper's hawks breed in their first year after hatching, and some males do as well. So those juves are less likely to be hanging out with the parents. They're busy starting their own nests. In terms of during the nesting season, all of our raptors seem to hang out for at least a few weeks after. And I think the great horned owls seem to stay together the longest. So the family will move from the nest site to a few hundred yards away, but they'll stay together as a family. And we know this because there are wildlife photographers in LA who track them religiously and have given us a lot of wonderful data. And so we know that they stick together as a family. The parents will continue to teach the young to hunt, teach them to fly. And I'm pretty sure this is documented well in the literature as well. All right. Dan, do you want to Google really fast, if you don't have this in your head, what is the life expectancy of red-tailed hawks and Coopers? I know we just need to memorize it. I know that it's somewhere in the like 20-something, years, often like 15 to 25 years. I was banding hawks with Pete Bloom, and we recaptured a red-shouldered hawk that he had banded years ago. And so because it was abandoned as a juvenile, we actually knew the age. And it was almost a record at 26 years old. So that's unusual, but definitely around, 15, 20 years, I think. And we can double check what it is for Coopers in case.
Yeah. And I'll say that the nest sites can be decades and decades old. There's a eucalyptus near where I live. It's at the corner of Las Virgenes and Mulholland. A lot of you know that is near the entrance to Malibu Creek State Park or King Gillette. There's a nest in a eucalyptus there that was active in 1981. So based on some research I did from Park Service archives. So these sites can go and go and go for a very long time if they're kind of in the right place and they don't get trimmed.
Definitely. And we'd welcome more questions in the chat. This next one I'm going to give to Dan as our expert on all things birds in LA.
Yeah.
Has there been any luck with eagles or osprey territories being reestablished in the study area?
Well, it's interesting because we get tips or questions about osprey every year. There's a small non-breeding population of osprey in LA. They hang out at the LA River, at Sepulveda Basin, Woodley Park, and also at Ballona Wetlands, Malibu Lagoon. They have not nested, but they seem to be doing fine and even doing a little better each year. Like we kind of see them more regularly. So it wouldn't surprise me. There's not historical data on them ever nesting. Same with bald eagle. But bald eagle, there is an active nest of bald eagle at one of the reservoirs in the San Gabriel Mountains along San Gabriel Canyon. It's very well known. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube, but you can stand on Highway 39 and see the eagles at their nests. Of course, there's the famous bald eagle at Big Bear, but we don't have anything closer to the study area. And unlike osprey that we see kind of all the time, we almost never see bald eagle in our study area.
Thank you. I added the Tree Care for Birds link in the chat. I'm also going to put the link to the most recent issue of the Griffith Park Reporter. You can also find all of those newsletters on the website. For reporting illegal tree trimming or poaching of any kind, CDFW has the CalTip line, and I'll put a link in the website for that webpage that has the phone number, etc. So if you witness anything while it's happening, you can call the warden and they can sometimes prosecute. Even if it's too late for them to actually stop them, they have been helpful in educating building owners and people. The warden will actually come out and give them a stern talking to, which hopefully can help prevent future issues.
And did you see Julia's question? Do you want me to take it about
I was
banding?
about to ask that, and yes, you can take that.
Yeah, so Julia asked in the chat about how tight these bands are around these birds' legs. So we get this question a lot. They don't overlap, so the bands actually kind of like the edges touch around the leg, and so you can't really make them any tighter. And each there are different size classes of bands, and since all red-tailed hawks have the same diameter legs, they know how wide or narrow to make that band, and it hasn't really resulted to any injury to birds, or else they wouldn't use it. But yeah, it's a great question, and I hear that a lot too.
Yeah, thanks. Susan asks, does the female in a Cooper's hawk, pair being immature and juvenile plumage have any correlation to nest success? I'd have to dig into the literature. I don't remember reading that it had a role. And again, almost 100% of females start nesting in juvenile plumage. I will say though, anecdotally, I have seen cases that seemed to be a juvenile plumage female sort of practicing nest building, but then not actually settling down with a mate. But I don't know that that's widespread. We'd have to get back to you on that, but thank you for that question. All right. How long do a pair of raptors typically continue to nest and birth chicks? Dan, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, there are examples of senescence, certainly in red-tailed hawks. I was talking with Pete Bloom, the raptor biologist, within the last year about this question, because we have had some red-tailed hawks hanging around and not nesting. And very anecdotally, I'm also wondering if that's because their nest got trimmed out or disturbed, and we're just seeing them in a different area. And I only say this because this happened in my neighborhood, where this pair of red tail showed up. They weren't nesting. They stayed for a year or two, never nesting. They copulated. They even carried sticks one time, but they definitely were not nesting, and they just hung out at a set of pines. And so sometimes when we think this, I was thinking it was probably a senescent pair. Well, then, like on the third year, I did find a nest nearby that I'm pretty sure was this pair. So the short answer is, who knows? There's a lot to be learned about these birds, but I think that they can trick you.
Thank you. I see a question. One of the gardeners that someone has made friends with has been sending info about nest sites in Los Feliz. What's the best place to send the tips? That reminds me to put our tip line into the chat here. So give me 1 second and I'll give you a link where you can send those.
You actually get a lot of good tips from gardeners and tree trimmers. We're very excited when we learned that their service area includes our study area.
Definitely.
And the mail delivery person.
Oh, you did, Jerry? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd encourage you to talk to your friends and neighbors. Here's the link to the tips page. And then if they have any trouble with the form, they can also send it to Raptors at Friends of Griffith Park. I'll put that in the chat as well. .org. So you can give them that email. You can also give them that tip form to fill out, and we greatly appreciate tips. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
No, I just had a student today in class tell me that she had a pair of hawks making a lot of noise in East LA. I was like, where in East LA? I don't know. What intersection? So.
Yeah, we are
I'm sure I made a good impression.
Talking to everyone we know, and Dan and I both have ended up finding nests through chatting about the study with someone at a unrelated work event or party or family gathering. So yeah, we really do appreciate tips of any kind, and we have a simple way to check if it's a known nest already. David says, I recently volunteered with Hawkwatch International, recording kestrel prey deliveries to their nesting boxes. Ooh, would adding kestrel nesting boxes be a viable solution? We actually are doing that. Friends of Griffith Park has partnered to add some nest boxes. And we think that a kestrel pair in the basin that we found this year nested in a nest box, but it was discovered after the young had fledged. So we saw one perching on the nest box, but we'll have to confirm this year if that was in fact where they nested. Jerry, I think you said you haven't had much uptake in the other nest boxes. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. To my knowledge, one of our problems is keeping them maintained, cleaning them out from time to time of other nesting species. That requires getting forestry division involved with their going up 25 feet, and they won't allow us to do that ourselves.
Yeah, so David, I've had that same idea. Like, if we know they're in East LA, let's just put them in some of the parks or Cal State LA. But yeah, you need to mount them so high, and they get, bees will come in and take over. So you got to clean those out. So it is a lot of work.
Yeah. But we are thinking about doing some more screech owl boxes this year and maybe coordinating with some neighbors. We have one volunteer in the study who has a screech owl that has settled into her screech owl box. So maybe they will raise a family next year. So stay tuned. And it never hurts to try a nest box.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
If you have a backyard and you want to try and do a nest box, you can find good guidance from Hawkwatch International. Wild Wings LA, which is run by a friend of ours here in Los Angeles, sells some nest boxes, and Scott is very knowledgeable and can help you. I think he'll even come help mount them. So we definitely recommend him as a resource, and I'll put that in the chat as well. Rachel mentioned wanting resources for gardeners. You can definitely give people the website as far as the Raptor study, but then on the resources for tree trimming, I put that website Tree Care for Birds in the chat, which is a really good resource. They have this best management practice guide, and then also the LA City biodiversity guidelines that I mentioned have guidance for everything from your garden to, planting native plants.
Also, at least recently, Theodore Payne Foundation was offering classes for gardeners in care of native plants. The pandemic hit just as they were really ramping up. It's all in Spanish and English, and it was a lot of fun. It was super rewarding. So Rachel, other people have had that dream too. So
and we at UCLA, we actually had all of our groundskeepers go through the certification, and it was a great experience for them as well as great for the university. They really enjoyed having that extra recognition of the certification. So there's a link to their landscaper program. Definitely recommend that. And then they also have just one-off workshops and things that you or someone can take if they don't want to do the whole certificate. All right, any other questions? I see some thank yous in the chat. Questions from folks? And for those on the line who are volunteers, again, we couldn't do any of this without you, and we look forward to celebrating you at the volunteer dinner. Those who aren't volunteers, volunteer next year, and you can join us for the volunteer dinner. Harnawaz has a question again. Out of curiosity, which raptor species in the study migrate and which stay residential? Dan, I'll give that to you.
Yeah, we think they all are residential. We think that pretty much everything stays where it breeds. They get a little shy or hard to find. Sometimes we get an influx from the north, particularly of young birds. We see a lot of young red shoulders this time of year moving in, kind of streaky. But yeah, our birds, while these species are migratory in other parts of the range a little bit, these seem to be our local resident LA raptors.
Yeah, although we will say, as Dan mentioned earlier, based on studies from Pete, a many decades of experience raptor biologist in Orange County, the juveniles seem to leave and come back. So they may go all the way up to Great Basin and then come back and settle and breed. But yeah, it seems like the adults are kind of hanging out all year. We have a pair of great horned owls at UCLA. They nested and they're already back and courting and hanging out and hooting, and people are spotting them. So that does seem to be the case. Although again, we haven't tagged any of our raptors and we hope to in the future. Peter asks, there were some reports earlier this year about northern pygmy owls being sighted on the Los Angeles crest. How often are they sighted in the basin? I believe the answer is never. Dan stepped away, but he can confirm.
It's a solid never, but Peter, I wanted to show you this.
You have to
I'm gonna
turn off
take it
your
off.
background.
Yeah, I'm going to take it off
blur.
blur. Hang on. Hang on.
Very cool book.
So this very cool book called, I don't know if it's backward for you, but it's Small Forest Owls, Small Mountain Owls, by Scott Rashid. I just picked it up. He's this truly obsessed owl and bird biologist in Estes Park, Colorado. And I was fortunate enough to watch him in action banding some birds. And he has done this study of pygmy owls, saw-whets, boreal, and flammulated owls in Colorado, where he finds nests of all these things, and he knows so much about their natural history. Yeah, thanks. So Nareed put in the chat. It's a very charming book. It's just not much. It's all like narrative, but it's just fascinating. And I'm writing a review for Western Birds. I was just really taken by this book. So, so Peter, if you want more info on pygmies and how to find a nest, which I can't even imagine how hard that would be, that's a good one to pick up.
And another good one to consider for those interested in owls that came out just this past year or two is called What an Owl Knows. I put a link to that one in the chat as well. It's a really great kind of, pop-sci narrative, easy to read, fascinating book with a lot of great owl information. All right, any other questions for us tonight? And again, we'll be, this presentation is recorded and it'll be shared on YouTube, and we can send out that link. We'll also send the links that we shared in the chat in a follow-up email to those who attended tonight. And our final report for the season will be posted on our website in the pretty near future, so keep an eye out for that as well. Do you expect to newly discover established nests that you may have missed, or do you think you've arrived at a kind of baseline? Great question, and we may have different answers to that. You can go first, Dan.
No, I think just when we think we have, we do something like find, we double the number of great horned owls. So I think for some species, like red-shouldered hawk, we're probably topped out at territories. But for others, we still have a long way to go with great horned owls.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. We do have a pretty good baseline. I think after the big effort that we put in during COVID, we've gotten a pretty nice baseline. And some of how we know that is what a high percentage of tips that come in, we already have the nest. That's helpful in knowing that we're kind of reaching some saturation point. But there's definitely still ones that we're missing and need to discover. There's definitely still territories where we know the pair is there, but we haven't found the nest. So they can be really hidden. A lot are in backyards. I saw a thank you from Kim Stroud, who is the director of Ojai Raptor Center. So again, thank you, Kim, for joining us tonight. Your work is amazing.
And I'll also add, let me just add, even with red-tailed hawks, like you think they're so big, they're so obvious. We just found like a second pair of red-tailed hawks at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, that one of our volunteers, Julia, monitored. And, just like, I don't know, 500 yards from our first one. And I had kind of seen a bird, a single in that area years ago. And then here's a whole new territory. So I think these things are so much more common than we knew, which is why we're finding like 200 nests of these things a year.
Yeah, and the juveniles are coming back and adding, and some areas do seem to be continuing to get more dense, whereas other areas seem to be saturated. So it'll be really interesting to see also if this reduction in rodenticides helps any boost in our population. Dan mentioned earlier the dip in Cooper's hawks that was concerning, and I wanted to add to that to say that same year that we had a big dip, the USDA fellow who bans at LAX had a huge dip, at a reduction in 50%, and our colleague up in Seattle had a big dip in their Cooper's hawk study. So we do think something was going on. It could be avian flu, it could have been drought, but there do seem to have been some impacts on our urban Cooper's population. But we were really encouraged to see a bit of an uptick this year. Maybe some of the disease impacts are reducing. So we'll see. We'll definitely keep tracking and see what happens. I also see that someone from Orange County Bird of Prey Center has joined us. So very nice to meet you, Joanne. And we heard you guys just got a new director. I was just reading about that today. So great to have you here and have other bird of prey folks. Do we have any nests in Debs Park, Montecito Heights? We sure do. Dan, you want to talk about
Yes.
that? You helped design Debs Park and help.
Yeah, I was on the team in yes, the early 2000s to design the Audubon Center. I banded birds there. Yes, we do have nests in Debs Park. We had a great horned owl nest, fledged young, right behind the nature center in that little canyon. We've got a red-tailed hawk active that you can see from the entrance. So all sorts of hawks. If you're in that area, we can definitely link you up. We actually have kind of a shortage of volunteers in the hinterlands of our study area, like in the El Sereno Highland Park area. So we're always happy to learn of more people coming out of the woodwork in that area. And actually, Deborah, fellow San Marino High graduate, hello. We may be expanding our study area west. So next year we were talking about trying to push it into Brentwood a little bit more. I did a drive up Mandeville Canyon earlier just to kind of scope it out. So I know we have a bunch of people kind of living on the west side past the 405 that aren't thrilled about driving to Koreatown to monitor their birds. So we will try to get you some far west side birds.
Yes, we are hoping to expand a little bit west. It's likely that the Venice-Bayona area will still be not in the study yet, but if you're willing to come a little bit to West LA or Brentwood, we'd love to have you. And I just put the link in the chat for the website, which has the application form. So please do apply. We would love to have some new volunteers. All right, tuned in super late because I was walking Commonwealth Canyon and I saw one of the falcons. I'm sure you covered this, but how many falcon nests are there in Griffith Park? Well, at Commonwealth, you might have seen a Cooper's hawk, but you may have seen peregrine falcon flying around Griffith, and Jerry can talk about nests in Griffith Park.
Well, as far as peregrines in Griffith Park?
Yeah, peregrines, and you can just talk about the park in general for a moment. I think folks.
Oh, well, it's pretty loaded. As everyone knows, we have a lot more Coopers in the more residential areas, but when you get to Griffith Park, you have a lot of red tails. We have like 3 or 4 years now of a peregrine falcon pair that's been very successful, fledging 4 young 2 years, and I believe 3 this year. Couple red shoulders here and there, and it's Griffith Park is really busy with hawks and falcons for sure.
Yeah, and I know, Jerry, you mentioned that the Recreation and Parks team, including park ecologist Courtney McCammon, was really helpful this year in kind of ensuring that the peregrines were protected from park goers.
Yeah, any new nests she knows about, and we communicate with Courtney a lot, and she helps on rescues as well. We coordinated on a lot of rescues this year. Courtney served as volunteer coordinator for the Raptor study for many years, and so it's been wonderful having her now in this position with Parks and Recreation, and having all of the in-depth knowledge she has about raptors has really helped to ensure that our park raptors are protected. Yeah, and the rangers are really helping too. Some of the younger rangers are really getting to know the raptors in Griffith Park better. And we try to protect nesting pairs from filming that goes on in Griffith Park all the time. So there's a lot of cooperation that's going on.
All right. And I am just typing an answer to you, Matthew. It definitely could have been a peregrine. There is a peregrine family there. So.
Go back and forth all night about that one.
I know. But I just wanted to mention the Cooper's thing because we do get so many people reporting peregrine falcons in their backyard in a tree. And right. In that case, it's almost definitely not a peregrine. So
a Commonwealth, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, we're just about at time here. I'll give one last call. Any final questions? Otherwise, I think we'll close for the night and we'll follow up with you all with some resources. Okay, I'll open up the chat to everyone. And if folks have any final comments, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much to Friends of Griffith Park for all of your support for this study. It's really
thanks to both
wonderful.
you and Dan. This program's really contagious, and I really appreciate your enthusiasm and look forward to the dinner Sunday night.
Thank you. It seems to definitely have an impact. One of my favorite anecdotes from this year, one of our volunteers mentioned that she had no interest in birds before she started volunteering, but now she's so passionate about it. She's become the Jane Goodall of every house finch in Los Feliz. So be prepared if you volunteer with us that it might change your life. So thank you all very much. I'm going to stop the recording.
Okay, good night, everyone.